Hey, thanks for checking out my video. This is going to be a deep dive into PoB DPS. I know that PoB can be very, very confusing sometimes, and seeing all these numbers here can be very overwhelming to understand what the hell is actually going on here. So I thought I'd talk about how this damage is actually calculated and break it down a bit. So let's get into it. First thing we're going to look at here is added damage. Okay, so we're going to start with cold here. So if you come to the calcs page in PoB and you look at your cold added damage here, you'll see on this PoB, which is a Frostblade's PoB, you have three sources of added cold here. You have Ice Bite, which has flat cold, and then also added per frenzy charge, which this setup has 7 frenzies. So that's 105 and 69. And then there's 81 coming from Frostblades here, and then 11 coming from this flat roll on this ring. This is the minimum damage here for cold. And then the maximum damage is the same. Ice Bite plus Frostblades plus the ring. It's the same math, just the max range numbers for the maximum added cold. Then if you come to this bottom calculation here, you'll see your base damage. Your base damage, okay, is your weapon damage plus your added damage. So if you take your base cold damage from the weapon, which is right here, 92 to 175, okay, you'll see that is the first thing there. That's from the weapon. And then the base damage multiplier, this first number here, 231, that's coming from the skill gem itself. So if you look on Frostblades, it has 231% of base damage on it. That's that number. Then this is the added damage, 266 to 400 that we just went over right here. So that gets added on then. And then both of those numbers together get multiplied by the effectiveness of added damage, which is also from Frostblade's gem itself right here. All that together, you get this number here, 827 to 1328. Okay. Now that number it shows up again down here. Okay, and we're going to come back to this number in a minute. But first, we're going to talk about the physical damage that a Frostblade's attack build will have. So to get the base damage, base physical damage, you need to look at the base physical damage that's on the claw and the effectiveness on the gem. Again, 231%. Those numbers are multiplied together, and you get this number, 265 to 602. Okay. Now this number is going to get multiplied by all of your increased and more damage multipliers. These two numbers here, which is also here and here, increased and more damage. So let's talk about increased first. Now I know there's a lot going on the screen right here, but I'm going to break it down. Okay. So for physical damage, because it's all getting converted to cold, is going to benefit from uh, generic increased, which is these ones here, all these numbers here, and then physical specific increase, which is these three numbers here, this 58%, and this 463% cold specific multipliers here, which is all these ones here. So if you add all these numbers together, these three numbers here, which is 354 plus 58 plus 463, you get 875% increased damage. That's where this 975 here is coming from. So 875% increase is a 9.75 times multiplier. So that's where that number comes from. Okay. Now we'll look at the more damage multiplier, which is the second number here next to the flat damage, base damage. 4.46 times. Okay. Now more damage is multiplicative. It comes from the more cold here and more damage here. Now these numbers, they have to get multiplied together. Okay, so if you look at multi-strike, polymath, frenzy charges, war chief, and then Trinity and LE damage with attacks support gems here, these numbers all get multiplied together here like this. You don't just add these numbers up. You have to multiply them. That's why more damage is so strong, because it's all multiplicative with each other. And this is including the minus 20 multi-strike penalty here, which is the first times 0.08 here. That's why this number goes down at first. But then when you multiply in all these other multipliers, the number starts creeping up and up and up to 4.47 for more damage. And that's where this number comes from here, 4.46. Second number is a more multiplier. Okay, so now you take these two numbers together here and you multiply the base damage times the increased damage times the more damage, and you get this number here. Now this is still physical we're talking about here, okay? Now that physical damage gets converted to cold damage, right? At 104%. And the reason it's 104% is because of this right here. 4% fizz as extra cold boot implicit. So that's where that extra 4% comes from. Okay, so that fizz damage right here goes to here in PoB. Okay, so this number here is your fizz as cold damage. Okay, now your cold damage, which we talked about from earlier, gets calculated the exact same way as the fizz damage does, except you'll notice that this number is lower than this number, and that's because cold damage doesn't get this physical exclusive increased scaling right here. So it just gets this and this, which is 817, which is why it's 9.17 here. But the more damage multiplier is the same. So you multiply these numbers together here, then you add the fizz damage that we just calculated, that's converted, and you get this number here, 45,000 to 81,000. Okay, uh, and that's your uh, hit damage so far. Okay, this is not counting crit yet. That's why it says hit damage. Okay, this is not factoring in crit yet. Okay. Emphasize this step. I don't think I really need to. I think I talked about exactly how these numbers are calculated. Moving on. Now we're going to talk about this number here, the effective DPS multiplier number. Okay. So now this number here from the previous step gets multiplied by your chance for double damage, which on this one is 10%, and then this effective DPS modifier number, which is times 2.17. Now that number here comes from your penetration plus minus resistance plus increased damage taken modifiers that you have, like on Yoke of Suffering, for example. So you add up all these numbers here together. Well, hold on, let me slow down. First, the first thing that PoB does is it calculates resistance. Okay, so 50 base is the resistance on this config, and that gets lowered down to 25% because of the elemental inversion mastery. So the inversion mastery with a 25% chance gives you an average of 25 resist. So if you look at this math here, right, if you hit 4 times and you hit for 50, 50, 50, and then minus 50, if you average out those numbers, you get 25 for an average resistance. So that's where PoB gets this number. Okay. Then it factors your penetration. So on this build, there's 26% penetration from Trinity and Forces of Nature. So that 26% get subtracted from that 25% to get an average number of minus 1%. So that's where this 1.01 multiplier here comes from having minus 1% average resistance. Okay. Then the increased damage taken numbers are multiplied. So all these numbers here added together is 115% increased cold damage taken. That is a 2.15 multiplier. So your damage is going to be multiplied by 1.01 for resistance and then 2.15 for all your increased damage taken. That's where this 2.172 effective DPS number comes from. Okay. Yeah, that's what I just said. So now the hit damage that we calculated earlier gets multiplied by that 2.171 number. And the double damage chance also. And you get a final cold damage number here of 109 to 195k. Okay, and that's this bottom number here for cold damage. That's all the cold damage calculations done. Now we can talk about how this cold damage gets added as extra fire damage from Heat Shiver. So if the enemy is frozen, you get 130% cold as extra fire from Heat Shiver. And that happens right here under the fire tab in PoB, starting with right here. So the PoB does all the same calculations that it did for cold and for fizz. And then this number here, which is the same number that we had from the cold tab, gets multiplied by 1.3 for fire damage, and then that's where this number here comes from, 60K to 107K. Okay. Now that number, which shows up here, gets its own different effective DPS modifiers because fire damage modifiers are different because fire doesn't benefit from bone chill. So that's why this number here is different. So on the cold one, it was 2.17, right? Right here. But on fire, it's 1.86 because you don't get bone chill for fire damage. So the resistance and penetration numbers are the same, and then the effective DPS number is a little bit lower because of the lack of bone chill. So then these numbers are multiplied together the same way, and you get your fire damage hit. So damage number times the effective DPS numbers times double damage equals your total fire damage. So now you've got your cold and your fire damage, okay? And now those two numbers are added together for a total hit damage, which shows up over here under the all column here. Now this number, okay, your average total damage number here is averaged, which is averaged to 324. Okay, so 233 to 415,000 averaged together is 324,000. Okay. Now this is the step where crit and crit multi get added right here. So if you multiply the 590 crit multi that this build has, which is a 5.9 times multiplier, then you multiply that by the average damage here, 324, and you get 1.9 million. So that's where this 1.9 million number is coming from. And the 0.99 chance to crit here is coming from this 99% hit chance that this PoB has right here. So if you're not hit capped, then it's going to count as not critting, because when you're not hitting, then you're also not critting. So now you have your average damage, okay, which is your combined cold and fire damage and any other type of damage you have, and then combined with your crit chance and your crit multi, okay? And now this average damage gets multiplied by your attack speed, your attacks per second, which is right here. So average damage times attack rate. Okay. Now your attack speed has increased and more multipliers just like your damage does. And it also has action speed multipliers too, if you have those. So if you look here, all these numbers up top here are the increased attack speed numbers, which is a total of 208%, which is a 3.08 multiplier total, which you start from your base attack speed, by the way, which comes from your weapon. So this claw here has a 1.95 APS. This is why having base attack speed is so important, by the way, on your weapon, because this is the number that all these calculations start with, is the base attack speed. So times all the increased attack speed, then it's times by all your more attack speed, which is here. So multi-strike plus ancestral protector on this build. And those two numbers are multiplied together like this, the same way that the damage multipliers from before were multiplicative. And then those numbers are multiplied by any action speed you have, which Trickster has 8% action speed all the time because of one step ahead. And that's multiplied right here. And all that together is 12.15 attacks per second on this build in particular. And so now that average damage number gets multiplied by your attacks per second for your total scaled damage, which on this build is 23,256,000. And there you go. That's mostly it. That's how damage is calculated in PoB. I know it can be extremely overwhelming looking at these numbers and understanding what they mean, but that's sort of a quick overview of how you can look through these tabs here on the calcs page to understand where your damage is actually coming from. So yeah, hopefully now you have a better understanding, and that's it. Hopefully this was I guess I tried to do this as quick as I could. I know it's complicated, but hopefully you learned something. So yeah, thanks for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel for more PoE content. If you have any questions about this or anything else, leave a comment below. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.